my arm with Toon Kings and men of Britonia. So let's set the tone, listening to the one and only. We've got to that old world charm.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode 18 of That Old World Charm. It is just my lonesome with the Falcon. Danny is busy graduating and being a lawyer person and whatever else.
It's just he just finished high school. He's on to bigger and brighter things.
I like to think that he's in some kind of reverse eating contest where where he's battling it out to be the sweetest of meats.
Yep,
I'm sweeter than you.
He's Benjamin buttoning it. That's what's going on.
Yeah,
100%.
We're a little bit of a weird one this weekend because we're going to be doing this week. I am jetting off to Dallas to go do some coverage with Games Workshop. So your part 2 will be covered by Peter and Danny over on the Patreon, which I hope you will join us at. We've got a beautiful community kicking off over there, over at Patreon at That Old World Charm. Please join us if you are inclined, and if you're not, thank you for joining us here. But we're going to be answering 2 of our Patreon questions, which we have set aside for full episodes because they're worthy of such. The first of which is discussing how to run a tournament. So how to run a tournament. And then another one, we've had a request for, what does an entry-level list to an event look like? So baby's first tournament. We're going to talk about the things you want to have. The gentleman in question has stated that they'd prefer to take Orcs and Goblins. So we'll talk about it from the greenskin skew, but we'll definitely try and cover a lot of the overarching elements you might want to consider taking to an event in the game as it sits right now. But Peter, how you doing, mate? You work on anything? You had any games lined up?
Hello, my baby. How are you?
Oh, no. I'm well.
No.
I'm well.
I've been doing really good. It was this kind of a slow week in the Colosimo household. Most of my family was away for a big chunk of it, so I tried to get in some old world games in person, but everybody was either sick or had responsibilities. So I'm mostly focused on other types of gaming this week, and I kind of theory crafted some lists. I'm trying to nail down how I want to update my nomadic WOG list, the one I played against Danny last week, and been mulling things over. I do want to get a level 4 wizard in there. I went wizardless before, and it was fine. Like we talked about it a little bit last week on our Patreon episode. Danny and I played a game. He was running a pretty hardcore all-in Warriors of Chaos list, and I was running my nomadic WOG. I ended up losing by 150 points, so just on the cusp of a draw. And I did miss having a wizard. It would have helped in a couple of situations, but I'm not sure if it would have been what gave me the win because dice were at play and all sorts of other things. So I'm just debating if it's necessary. I do love Double Wyvern. It's been amazing. And the BSB has been great. It's just I don't know which one of those 3 things to drop to make the wizard possible.
Yep.
Also looking at Kicknick again. So there's a lot going on in my brain to make Nomadic WOG a competitive list. But I'm pretty excited for it.
Nice. Well, yeah, I do love that. Even just talking about the metagame of Orcs and Goblins, there's 3 tiers you could almost talk about you can talk about them just as the book, just the army book, no ifs, no buts, just take what you can take, and then you can go up levels and a whole new playbook added in the Arcane Journals. So the GW are doing a good job of giving us alternative ways and exciting ways to play there, and I'm just happy to hear that's ringing true for yourself. But let's jump into the first of our topics, running an event. So I think I ran 1 or 2 small RTTs for Fantasy in 8th edition. I've run a colossal amount more for other game systems, some of which will be relevant, some of which will not. But you run a lovely con called Falcon.
Yes, yeah.
Are you going to be running that again coming up soon? I'm assuming Old World's going to be a cornerstone of that.
Yes. So I started running Falcon last year. Prior to that, I've run a number of 40K events, and back when 8th edition was a thing, I probably ran, I don't know, several dozen Warhammer Fantasy Battle, like RTT sized events. It was very popular here, so it wasn't an issue to get like a monthly RTT or bi-monthly RTT on the go. So I ran a lot of events for Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and Falcon's my new thing. I started it last year. It's like a Warhammer 40K GT. This year it'll be almost a major in terms of size, and that's only because of me trying to pace myself financially. Because once you get the up in size of games, it can start to impact the pocketbook you've built out your terrain and things like that. And my plan is next year to add Old World. I looked at adding it this year, but I feared it would take away from my Age of Sigmar community because there's a lot of overlap there, especially here in this area. And I did have a golden ticket for Age of Sigmar that I wanted to make sure was like properly accoutred.
So tell us about the golden ticket thing for people who do not know. Of course, that's a reason to run AOS over Old World for the time being until we start getting the golden tickets are flowing, which I'm really excited and hopeful for. But what the hell does that mean?
Oh, yeah. So Games Workshop offers what they call golden tickets, and they are essentially tickets to the Warhammer World Championship that is held every year. And tournament organizers can apply to get as many as they want, actually, of Warhammer 40K or Age of Sigmar golden tickets to give out at their events. All of the events are kind of graded and rated on the back end by the tournament. I can't remember the position, but there's like a North American and a world like tournament organizer for Games Workshop. And they go through all the applications, and based on precedent, etc., they will assign you golden tickets. And so this year, I asked for a golden ticket for Warhammer 40K and a golden ticket for Age of Sigmar, and I was lucky enough to get both. And so the winners of my Warhammer 40K event and my Age of Sigmar event will get a ticket, like an admission ticket to the Warhammer World Championships later this year. And they will get part of their travel cost paid off as well.
Wow. I can't wait for that to come to Old World, and I really hope that it does. In saying that, let's pivot our focus over to more Old World, less AOS and 40K, because we know what people are here for. They're here for the goods. They're here for the good stuff. So running an Old World event. Now, I think you've actually opened up a couple of different topics there already. You're talking about how, running Age of Sigmar and Old World concurrently might just cut your lunch on either or both. How do you go about canvassing your community to find out interest and get a rough estimation of numbers? Because, of course, if you're going to want to run a tournament, you're going to want to know how many to cater for.
Yeah. So in the past, whenever I've run events, like you have to have a good feel for your community. So do you have a regular game night, for example? That helps a lot. So in the past, in the old days, we had a regular game night every Tuesday night, and we would get 10 or 12 folks that would show up and play Old World or Warhammer Fantasy Battle back then, like literally every Tuesday night, and sometimes more. So it was very easy to go in on a Tuesday and chat people up and say, hey, would you be willing to come in on a Saturday or a Sunday or both and play some games? And you get some feedback. And you can build out from that to get an idea of if it's worth your time to set up the event. If you don't have that, there's Facebook groups and all sorts of other things to get involved, to get a feel. But generally, I recommend if you're going to start TOing events and organizing events on a grander scale, you want to have your finger on the pulse of your local community. So for me, I know that we have, a good dozen or so of folk in my city that would play Old World and a decent amount that would play Age of Sigmar. I also know that in the cities close by, say Fredericton, St. John, Halifax, there seem to be stronger communities for Age of Sigmar than there would be for Old World. and it may be a mistake. It's very possible that because my finger isn't as hard on the pulse of, say, Halifax as it is here, that maybe Old World would have been the bigger draw. But there is a lot of overlap. That is one thing I know.
Yeah.
Like when I follow the Old World forums, etc., for in these other cities, I can see like it's very much the same guys playing Age of Sigmar. They're playing Old World, or they're playing 40K as well, because there's a lot of overlap in Games Workshop games. And yeah, it's very easy to ruin your day by trying to run multiple events at once.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Let's just focus in. We'll just say let's say you and I are just going to run an Old World event. We all know that TOing is a ridiculously thankless job compared. There's no real money in it until you get to like massive events, and there is a lot of overhead comparatively to the entry price. How many people would you want to know are coming before you would put your hand up for something like this?
For me, it depends on the first thing. It depends on is where am I holding the event? Yeah. Am I holding it in like a local game shop? So do I have like a place with tables and terrain already? Like, do I have to invest anything that way? If I don't have to invest anything in terms of table or terrain, like I have an actual dedicated spot that I can use, I'm super cool with 8 people. Like if I just get 8 people for a one-dayer, I'm jazzed because I know that I can talk to the shop, and I can. Oftentimes they'll just let you play for free, and if not, they're only going to charge you, $200 to rent their gaming room for the day, let's say. And if you're charging, say, $30 a ticket, you've at least covered the cost of playing. Often these shops will have store credit that they can use through Games Workshop, because they have their own prize. What's the word for it? They have like a prize pool that they have budgeted aside. The Games Workshop gives them, and other companies will give them, so they can just give you, say, $100 in prize support, and that's more than enough, right? Sure. If I'm doing it myself, like I have to find a spot, I have to pay for tables and all these other things, then I need a bigger number, right? I'm looking at, I probably want at least 30 people. If I'm also going to have to pay for tables, pay for possibly drinks and chips and things for the guys and stuff like that, like the price goes up on my ticket prices, and also on how the minimum amount of people I want to actually show up to the event.
Yeah. Of course, one of the easiest ways to get up and going, if you don't have a store to lean back on that has, terrain and mats and whatnot, ally yourself with a local club, run it, be like, this is the, Skulls and Daggers GT supported by XYZ club, and let them, float a little bit of the overhead of the, tables and chairs and whatnot. They might have a club space as well that they have a good arrangement with that you can link up with. And then, they can cover a baseline amount of terrain and whatnot. And, they can get some kickback in being the named assistant and or sponsor of the event.
For sure.
Then when you do that, you guarantee a little bit of a buy-in from the community, being like, well, our club's supporting it, so we go support the club and therefore support the event. How much are you comfortable paying? I mean, for a ticket, just say Peter wants to go to a tournament. When you look at the ticket price, what's the number that would make you go, yeah, that's fair enough? And what's the number that would make you go, yikes, I need to actually think about this?
I mean, I've paid a lot of money for tickets to some of these events.
Me too, man. Me too.
So it depends on what's on offer, right? And what's the spectacle. So if I'm going to an RTT, usually I'm cool with $30, $40 tops.
Yeah.
If it's a one-dayer, if they're offering food or something like that, then that changes that for sure, right? But generally, if I'm going to a one-day RTT, $30 is probably getting near the top end for me in Canadian monies of what I'm going to spend to do a one-dayer. If you're asking for 40, 50, 60, then I'm expecting something back just by showing up.
Yeah.
Or there has to be like some big prize pool on the line. For a GT, I'm super cool with paying 50 or $60 at the minimum. For a big super major, like sky's the limit. It depends, right? Like I've gone to Capital City Bloodbath on the TO's dime, and they have some pretty expensive tickets. But if I was going as a player, I would pay, because they have paid meals and it's a beautiful like arena that they play in.
Yep.
LVO is a spectacle, so I'm willing to pay a couple $100 to go to LVO because I'm already paying anyway to go to Vegas, etc.
Exactly.
Things like that, right? So
yeah, totally agree. I think the same. In Australia, if someone wanted to ask me $50 for a one day, I'd probably be like, just please justify. But yeah, $30-$40.
Yep.
Probably totally fine. And in saying that, like when the community's just getting off the ground and where we want to go to events, there is a thirst. I'd happily pay a little bit extra just to make sure the TOs get money in their coffers and they can continue doing what they're doing for years and years rather than this is just a one-off, another flash in the pan. Because that's what we don't want to see. Because so often, and I'll say this, like podcasts, TOs pop up and pop in and pop out pretty regularly from tournament communities and event communities. Like you'll have, there'll be the one that runs one, and then they're like, "Wow, that sucked. I am out of pocket. Like I'm out of money, and that was very thankless, a bunch of headaches, and I worked my ass off, and I lost money." And that's what we don't want to see happen. We don't want to have TOs burning themselves out or feeling like it's not worth it. But then again, you'll have TOs like you just said. You just listed off Capital City Bloodbath, LVO. These things have been running for years, if not decades, and there's obviously a rhyme and reason. There's obviously desire, and they've got a method to their madness. You got any tips for the budding TO out there to not, to avoid pitfalls and to not get burnt out, or
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of good stuff. So a few things. First off, if like we already talked about having like your hand on the pulse of the community, know who's a draw. So in every community, no matter how big, there's a person that if they come to your event, at least 3 or 4 other people will come. If we're talking like an RTT size, or at a GT level, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 potential people might show up if that person shows up. So you want to make sure that they're coming. Like that's a thing. If you can convince them to come, then it's a field of dreams scenario. If you build it. Otherwise, like try to minimize the cost on yourself for your first events. It's very easy to make it very expensive on yourself. So canvas shops, like we've already said, a lot of these shops can, they have like a prize pool budget either from companies or that they internally have that they can claim on their taxes or whatnot. So go to every game shop that you can find. Do not be afraid. Talk to them. They will probably be able to give you something. To help with prize support. And don't pull a single dad Christmas scenario on your first couple events where you look at your prize pool and you think, this isn't enough. I need these people to love me. You don't need to do that. A lot of times, especially for smaller events, people just want to go for the community. Like the prize support doesn't matter, right? It's about going in, hanging out with a bunch of guys and girls and playing a game that you love for an entire day. So you don't need to drop, $1 or $2 grand on prize support for your 8-person RTT. Things like that. So those are things you should consider. If you want to go big, and you feel like you're ready to go big, now you need to understand that you need to budget aside probably a couple grand just in case. Right? Like you need, because you might not get the amount of people that you think. You might, there's going to be unexpected costs. You might think that the tables at the Legion Hall are free, and then you find out you have to pay them $30 a table or whatever to rent. So those are things you need to be, psychically, you have to have your brain ready and your pocketbook ready for these potentialities. And if you're willing to accept those losses, then it's a big deal. But for an RTT, these people are coming to play a game that they love. You don't need to buy their love.
Yeah, that's correct. I think the best way to do it, and it's a little bit savage because, of course, trying to run a tournament for the community that you adore is and should at its core be an altruistic exercise. But I think you have to be kind of prudent and savage with yourself at the outset. Do a budget. How much money or how much of your own money are you willing to put up, and have a hard line of this is the amount of money I will not I will refuse to be out of pocket, because there were some guys in Ballarat, my old hometown, where they did the full budget of buying everything up front. They were like, we want to be TOs and we want to be TOs for years and years to come, and they said, okay, we're going to be out of pocket for the first 2 years. We're going to run 3 to 4 events a year, and we're going to be out of pocket for the first 2 years before we break even. And so they came in with like a 5-year plan of, we will break even year 2. We'll start to make a little bit of money, back, which is entirely their right. TOs, for the amount of work that they do, should be acceptable for us to be like, yeah, if you guys pocket a couple $100 out of this each, that's totally fine. I don't love the idea of like full event for profit. Still, like, I mean, stuff at like conventions and things like that, where the draw is, you're putting on a con. This is a professional outfit of, people who work a day job. This is their day job, stuff like that. 100% pay them. But there is a weird line that I've found where there's some gentlemen that I know of who run tournaments. They run like 1 to 2 tournaments a year, like lean heavily on the community and then pocket as much as they can. And those people have come and gone in the community. And usually when the community finds out, usually it doesn't sit well with people. But people, some people still like, yeah, it's worth it. Doesn't matter. But I don't know. As a TO myself, I'm totally okay with TOs making money. I think they should be allowed to, if they've worked themselves up and they've run enough events to become their event is a draw and it's a prestige thing and they've put the work in over years and years. I believe that they should be allowed to make a profit and we shouldn't be adverse to that. In saying that, my man, running Falcon, have you done a budget? Have you, what are your T's and C's? What are the lines you won't cross? And what are you, for as much as you're willing to go into, because it's personal stuff.
Sure.
What are the pitfalls you're trying to avoid, or things that are necessary for you to see the event as a success? Like what denotes a successful event?
I mean, for me, the success of the event is completely rides on the people there the day of and how they interact with me and with each other. So last year for Falcon, it was my first big event I'd run in a long time. I'd assisted running some big events around the world when I was doing 40K stats, but never the nitty gritty. I lucked out in getting an amazing venue for a very cheap cost, because venues, guys, are like going to be one of your big money sinks.
Yeah.
To rent a place for a full weekend for a large event, you're often, a few $1,000s in like out of pocket that you're going to need to make back in ticket prices. But I managed to get a place for $1,500 that could, if I wanted to, fit like 300, 400 people. I don't have the terrain for that. So I set some goals. I said, based on what I know about this community, I think I can get 40 people for Warhammer 40K without me having to, kill somebody. And I can probably get 20 some odd for Age of Sigmar. If I get less, I need to be able to accept that. I then said, if I get that, that's 60 times. How much money do I have to spend on tickets in order to pay off the venue and then also pay for prize support? So I set a ticket price of $60. I spoke with an event that was running in the same spot. They agreed to just let me give out free tickets to their event because I was covering the cost of this particular section of the Coliseum. So that was an added value that I could give to people. I then canvassed all of the major game stores in the area. I probably got about $1,500 in prize support from them. I went out and bought bronze statues of Falcons that I put on trophies. that cost me out of pocket, $400 or $500.
That's so cool.
And then now, I'm looking at making about $3,600. I've spent about 2,000 of it already, but I haven't nailed down terrain or tables or like the extras. So I knew this was going to be an out-of-pocket event regardless. I ended up getting tables for decently cheap through the venue. So that cost me for the what ended up being about 90 tables to make everything work. That's an additional $1,000 for terrain. I outsourced a lot of terrain from locals. So I managed to get almost all either WTC or UKTC terrain simply by agreeing to transport it myself. So I drove a couple hours to nearby cities, and some local stores were lovely enough to give me that. There's a club called Roll the Initiative that runs out of Halifax that provided a bunch. And I was able to have really nice tables, and that just cost me gas money. Age of Sigmar, however, I could not get terrain, so I ended up spending another about $1,000 on Age of Sigmar terrain.
Okay.
That I ended up MDF terrain, enough for a good 15 to 20 tables was what I was looking for, which was very cheap, by the way, to get it like this. So after everything was said and done, I had budgeted that I was willing to accept about a $2,500 loss on the event. Not everybody can do that. I understand. This is a big event, though, and I wanted my first one to be big so that I could hopefully get more people the next year.
And momentum is definitely a thing you want to consider as well. Like, is it worth, front loading my efforts to, recoup, and then some later in the piece. Let's talk about terrain for a couple of minutes, then we'll transition over to our second topic. Terrain is a big deal now in the old world. Oh man, I remember playing 8th edition at CanCon, and the Watchtower was a piece of paper with Watchtower written on it. Which, considering the efforts to get there and the 3 or 4 days of accommodation you got to purchase and whatnot, I felt a little hard done by back in the day. And that was my first 3-day tournament ever as well. And I was like, fair enough. But now terrain is vastly more important. And whilst we used to be able to get away with like maybe 3 or 4 pieces of terrain on tables, events now, I think there is an expectation of a little bit more effort. How would you go about sourcing and getting terrain for the old world?
So for me personally, if you enter a place with a good game store, they probably have at least some terrain. If you're lucky enough, you're in a big city, they might have a ton of it. So that's the first place I'm always going to go. I'm going to see, what do my local game stores have for their own terrain? Is it something that they're willing to lend me? Or in the case of like an RTT, can I just play this? Can I just run this event here and pay you a couple $100? And then I can use your terrain, promise not to break it. If we break it, I'll buy it, essentially. That's the easiest way. Then you want to go to your local community if this is your first time doing things, because there's a lot of people that have terrain for their basement games, let's say. Like I've got a couple of really good friends here locally that have run a lot of Warhammer Fantasy Battle games, and they have a ton of their own terrain. So I'd go to them, I'd ask, what do they have available? I'd like to take a look at it because I want it to look at least semi-decent. And then once I've got that, hopefully I have enough for an RTT, maybe something bigger just by doing that. That's when I'm going to look at if I need to buy stuff myself. 3D printing is huge now. It's an easy way to make things work for you if you want to plan things out in advance. If you don't have 3D printing as an option, I do recommend taking a look at MDF. You can get some pretty cheap MDF kits out there if you're willing to build them yourself. And that's what I did for Age of Sigmar. And in fact, the terrain kits that I have for Age of Sigmar, most of them work very well for the new old world. So I've got a lot of buildings that I can use. I've got towers, I've got forests, I've got like ponds and water scenarios. So I can pretty easily now, because of this Age of Sigmar terrain, also run, a 30-person old world event. So that said, once you guys have budgeted this kind of stuff, if you looks like you're going to put a hole in your pocket, before you buy, go to the game stores that are your local to you and ask them, are they looking for terrain? Because you can probably, after you've run your event, sell your terrain to these game stores. Maybe not at full price. Maybe you will be able to sell them at full price to get a lot of your money back. I was able to do that myself. There was a local store that really wanted Age of Sigmar terrain. So when I got this really good deal on buying Age of Sigmar terrain in bulk, they agreed to buy a good half of the terrain that I purchased because they needed it locally themselves. So there's lots of different things you can do in that way to recoup some of your money on those early events.
Freaking-tastic. I'd also add to that, you can go to a lot of modeling and hobby stores. Because so one of the things that I'm going to think is one of the hardest pieces of terrain to source is the amount of forests people are going to want.
Yes.
Hobby stores, model train stores where you can just buy like pre-painted, pretty nice trees. And then if you just do a wobbly shape MDMF cutout, paint it appropriately, jam those trees onto it, you have a pretty serviceable, if not actually pretty good forest for a multitude of different tables, different deployments and whatnot. But in saying that, when we talk about the distribution of terrain pieces onto a table, when you're walking up to a table at an event, mate, and you want to see it as like, a pretty even, if not, I like it when table side is weighted one way or another. One of the things I really despise, and I still do not love to this day, is how homogenous table selection is at competitive games in other GW arenas, where it's exactly mirrored. There is no advantageous side of the board for one army or another. There's no choice to be made. I just rock up at tables and I just start deploying my models sometime because I know when my opponent rocks up and we roll off, whatever, doesn't matter. If they make me move, I think they're a dick. That's it. Because the sides of the table are exactly the same. I don't like that for the old world. And in fact, I think it's bad, the old world, for it to be mirrored terrain layouts. I mean, you talk about all the historical battles in the world, and usually they're fighting at a location that is advantageous to one side or another. And that is because the chosen battlefield is usually chosen by the guy who gets there first, rocks up and sets up his stuff. But in saying that, when you rock up to a battlefield, at an event, what do you want to see on the table? Like how many pieces of terrain and what kinds?
I want to see 5 to 6 pieces of terrain. That's kind of what I feel you don't want to go more than 7. So 5 to 6 to me feels like a very solid number. I want to see at least 1 forest. Hills, I'm hit or miss on. I love hills, but I also don't want them on every table. I want it to be a choice. I also want hills to be everywhere, not just in deployment zones.
You're correct.
Buildings, it's the same thing. Buildings can be super annoying, so I don't want them everywhere, but I do want them. I want that to be something you have to play around. I want a really solid mix of terrain. I don't care either way about if it's symmetrical or not. There's pros and cons to both. The pro of a symmetrical table is that everything is quote unquote fair in terms of terrain.
Fair. I want trials and tribulation. I want to win through adversity. I want tactical choices. I want things to matter.
And there was a time in my younger years where I was all about asymmetrical terrain. I was like, let's fucking go. Now in my olderness, yes, Peter.
Well done.
That need has waned. I'm still cool with an asymmetrical table. I feel like as a player going to an event, I need to, as long as I know what to expect. So as a TO, something else you should probably consider when you're building out your packs, because you're going to want to build a player pack, you should show them what to expect from your terrain. So whether you're using, say, like the square-based terrain guide, slap that in your pack. We're using the square-based terrain guide. Here's the link. Take a look so you'll know what your tables are going to look like. Or set up a table where the fuck ever you want. Take some pictures and then put that either on your Facebook group or event page or in your pack, just to say this is the kind of table you should expect to see, just so people see it. You can write some of our tables are going to be asymmetrical. There's going to be a healthy mix. Expect at least 1 forest and 1 hill. However you want to set up your tables, give people that advance notice, because it will, for the more competitive folk, it will kind of change how they want to build a list.
Yes, correct.
Your casual players that are just there to have a good time and have a few drinks, they don't care, and that's cool too. But try to appeal to everybody.
Yeah, and devil's advocate, I'm okay with asymmetrical tables. I just don't want them to be the norm. I don't want them to be the expectation. I don't want people to be able to have complete and total foreknowledge of every single configuration of every table that they're going to play on. Yeah. So if it was a hard and fast rule, that if I had to just be like, here is Adam's rule of thumb for that, if you are building or if you're running an event for 30 players, just to consider it like this. Every 10 tables, 2 of them buildings, 2 of them, 2 of them with more buildings than not, like say they have 2 buildings instead of 1 building, 2 of them with more forests than not, as in 2 or more forests than 1 or none. And same for hills. So 6 of them can be multiples of a different aesthetic or a different aspect to the way to play the game, can alter the way the game will play in a different way in one way or another. And then you have 4 that are just pretty neutral. Like everything's relatively same. Everything is like, one-ofs or, nothing that's going to push or skew the battlefield in one way or another. So 4 neutrals and then 6 of the pack being, altered in a different way to make a different aspect, more highlighted. That's something that I would think would be a very easy way to look at it if you wanted to do that. And then just duplicate that out by how many, multitudes of 10 that you are catering for. Does that sound bonkers to you?
No, I think that's cool. I think that's exactly what you should do.
Exactly what you should do. There we go. Done, sorted, fixed everybody. Done with events stuff. We can talk more about events and event running and all those things. But I think it would be cool if we shelve the rest of this conversation, because I think we've done a little bit of a good job in giving, running your first tournament, what to expect and stuff. But we might shelve it and get on some big TOs on our show, in a couple of weeks, couple of months.
I think that's a really good idea. And this was a patron question from Nimunian. Anyway, guys, if you're listening to this, if you're a patron, even if you're not a patron and you just want to learn how to run an event, talk to other TOs. Feel free to message me. You can pop into our Discord if you're one of our patrons and ask specifics, like if you want specifics that we haven't covered here, because I'm fully willing to help you out for sure. Just as I don't know a single TO that isn't.
No TO is an island, is what you're saying. All TOs network, all TOs lean on each other and ask for support and advice and borrow terrain and everything like that. So yeah, definitely hit up your local.
Reese and Frankie, who run Frontline Gaming, one of the biggest, event organizations out there. They still to this day borrow terrain from shops sometimes for the BAO. I've seen it. Like, it's just a thing at Las Vegas Open. Occasionally they'll talk to GW, they'll talk to a local store and be like, hey, we need 10 more tables of terrain. And these guys, have been doing it for forever. So
yeah, they're over a decade in and they still lean on each other. I think it's a great testament.
Yeah. And they didn't make any money off of their events for years.
Oh man. Yeah. I remember hearing when COVID was hitting, and I can't remember if it was the 2021 or 2022 LVO, because I know 2020 and 2021 got canned, and they were talking about if the plug gets pulled in this one, we're out. Like the organization's folding. We can't.
Well, the year before COVID was the first year that LVO had made money without them having to rely on external sales. Like just tickets alone made them some money. So anyway.
And that just shows you, one of the biggest in the world still, not redlining, but, it's tight out there.
Yeah.
All right. At this part of the show, maybe we would tell you about a sponsor of some kind or some people we're working with or something like that. If you would like to sponsor the show, if you're at all interested out there in getting your name inserted here, anyway, we're kind of open and willing. Let us know, slide into those DMs. If not, jump. Well, Peter is willing. And we all know how willing Danny is. But just offer up that sweet meat on a platter. Jump over and slide into those DMs and let us know what you'd like to do or how you'd like to get involved. If not, jump over to the Patreon. We love you all over there. You guys are incredible, and we wouldn't be here without you. But we're going to do a segment on Baby's first event list. So you want to go to a tournament? You want to jump into the event scene. It might not be a competitive event, might be more hobby focused, fluff focused, might be narrative, might be campaignish, might be a league. But how to prep yourselves and what are the kind of elements you'd like to, or you should consider having in a list for such a thing. I think the gentleman in question has asked us to design it around Orcs and Goblins, but we'll certainly widen the field to make it applicable to all factions out there. All right, Peter, you've never been to a tournament before. You're green behind the ears. You're just a baby, and you want to go to a tournament. You want to go to an event. You want to jump into the event scene and enjoy one of the best and funnest ways to play the game. What kind of things should you consider in your list?
Well, the first thing is you don't want to list that's too complicated for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. part of the enjoyment of a tournament is, playing something that you're comfortable with, but also, giving some comfort to your opponent. So if you're spending the entirety of your games like having to flip through 3 books trying to find a rule because you're trying something new, or there's some combination that you've set up that's a little too intricate maybe for your gaming level, don't do that for your first event.
Agreed.
Stick it to something simplistic.
I love the idea of, if you're going to your first tournament, definitely put in as much effort as necessary to make sure you and your opponent have as enjoyable experience as possible. But you kind of want to limit the amount of units that you take so that you can kind of, if you wanted to, take photos on your phone or, create a folder or print out a couple of pages that have every one of the unit entries on it. So you're not flicking back and forward through a book. So you just got 2 or 3 pages in front of you. Here's the magic spells that I'll be taking. Here's the magic items, and here are the units that I've got. Here's Chaos Knights, here's Chaos Warriors, here's a Demon Prince, and you just got them printed out right in front of you. I think that is a fantastic way to get into the game, and definitely and to what you said, the more work you can do before the event will pay dividends when you get there.
Yep.
So, all right, we're constructing a list. We want to keep it lean. We want to keep it lean in unit entries, as in we don't want a huge diversity of one of units to constantly be looking up, what does this do? What its armor save is? What did it hit on? How many attacks and crap like that? But we also want to have an army that can hang, that has diversity, has play patterns, has different things it can do. So there, of course, are different kind of SKUs we can push into. We can go with MSU, MMU. We can go with Horde, so to speak. Which one of them do you think is the most rewarding for a first-time player? And which one of them is going to be the most easy to use?
I think the most rewarding kind of gameplay for a first-time player is probably going to be something with like multiple medium-sized units, quote unquote MMU. MSU lists tend to require a lot more thinking to set up play patterns, or like they're set up on certain combos that might just not go off for you. So MMU, you get that extra benefit of you can survive a turn if everything goes wrong.
And exactly to your point, I should have clarified. MSU is multiple small units, or a list archetype that takes many, just a level of numerosity of good word use, Adam, of numerosity on the table, where you have lots of usually very quick or very disposable elements that come together to make a whole. And usually it requires a certain level of finesse in the movement phase. MMU is multiple medium units, like to your point, where you have essentially you don't have any one unit that its loss of will result in the loss of the game or the game being over. And you can kind of roll with the punches a little bit more and play and get a little bit more into the game, where it's not just going to be over or get absolutely blocked out. Horde is to the other extent, where it's pretty forgiving in the making of mistakes. But if you ever make any big mistake, the game is cooked. You're over. It's done. Yeah, it's already finished. And so I do like the idea of the MMU, where you have a bunch of units, maybe 4 or 5 decent-sized bricks, and then maybe a chaff piece or 2, and then maybe some shooting behind it. And then you get to play a dynamic game. Because I think one of the best things you can try and do as a new player is play something that plays a little bit of everything. You don't want to just be learning the fight phase. You want to have a little bit of magic, a little bit of shooting, a little bit of combat, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think you want a little bit of everything. And you don't want a list that's going to fall apart as soon as you lose one of the things.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly right. That's where I think actually the gentleman asking about Orcs and Goblins is a great idea, because I think that's Orcs and Goblins right now I think are a perfect entry level army. They have it all. They have all the elements, and you can lean into whichever one you want to more easily than many other factions. Like you can just decide to take 3 level 4s if you want to. No problems. You can decide to take dragons if you want to. You can decide to take 4 or 5 artillery pieces and still have like a big fatty unit of black orcs and whatnot. In saying that, talking specifically about Orcs and Goblins, what does a all-comers Orcs and Goblins list look like right now for an event?
So I think an all-comers Orcs and Goblins list, you need Night Goblins. So you need 2 or 3 Night Goblin characters, because Night Goblin units require Night Goblin characters to have them in the list. So you want your plain Jane Night Goblins because you want Fanatics, because Fanatics are amazing. So if this is your first time and you're trying to figure out Orcs and Goblins, and you want to get some practice in before you go in, practice how you're using your fanatics, because fanatics are kind of, I believe, the main key to making orcs, like plain Jane orcs and goblins, work the most effectively. You probably want a wyvern boss if you own one. Otherwise, you're going to want to put them on a chariot or put them on foot in a big block. But wyvern would be the preferred. And then you want some black orcs, because black orcs are good. And then I believe you can just almost take whatever else you want for the rest of the list. I think that's your core, though.
Yeah. I do like the idea that we talk about the best all-comers list of a certain faction, then we kind of try and strip it back to make it more entry-level friendly. And I think you just did a great job there. I don't think the Wyvern is necessary for an entry level. I think it's possibly even to your benefit to just jam it in the Black Orc unit and just kind of make a bigger bus where you don't have the big win or big loss event of, a 350 to 400 point Wyvern boss, popping because you've misplaced them or you've chased chaff when you didn't need to. To level 4 or not level 4 for a newcomer? What do you think?
I think for orcs and goblins, you might as well. Their level 4s are very cheap.
Very cheap.
They have very good magic items. Another thing about being new is you want to have things that let you make up for your mistakes. And having 2 level 4s even is a good way to do that. Sure, it's a lot of spells to remember, so it can go both ways. I'm not saying you need to do it, because it is another set of spells you need to learn. But having at least 1 level 4, possibly 2, but specifically because orcs and goblins can take very cheap level 4s, I think is perfectly great.
Yep, totally agree. All right, so we've got our core. We're going to have one decent sized unit, one decent sized melee unit, be that Black Orcs, be that whatever it may be for your said faction, the Graveguard, whatnot. We've got ubiquitous kind of bunker pieces and or shooting assets. Chaff. How necessary is chaff, and how many pieces would you advise taking for a newcomer? Because they can be very hit or miss, but at the same time, if you're playing an MMU style, they're not as necessary as in other lists, like say MSU pieces. In Horde, they live and die by their chaff use. Like, did I use my chaff well enough to actually charge with my 1,000-point unit, or am I getting chaffed and the game is cooked?
Yeah, so I think in general, chaff is very good. The thing about orcs and goblins, however, is especially if you're not running a Black Orc on a Wyvern to quell impetuosity with big boy time, it's the chaff for orcs and goblins is almost exclusively impetuous. Yeah. Which makes it harder to use. And chaff in general can be just hard to maneuver. So this is your first time going. Maybe you don't take 2 units of Wolf Riders or 2 Goblin Chariots. But if you are capable of taking that big Black Orc on a Wyvern, or a couple units of Black Orcs, however you want to run it, so you can quell that impetuosity and you can ignore that rule, so you don't even have to remember that it exists.
Yeah.
Then I 100% believe you should probably look at running maybe 2 units of 5 Wolf Riders or 2 Wolf Chariots at the very least. If you want to just look cool, you can also look at Mangler Squigs. They're a little more expensive, but they look cool and they will do stuff.
They will do stuff. And as for I'm coming around more to the Mangler Squig as a anti-chaff piece, and anti, light unit piece, because in my army, I'm running in my armies, I'm a lot of the time running stuff like single gorges, 3 Yetis, 3 bulls, stuff like that. I hate those Manglers. Those units hate those Manglers. My Iron Guards don't care at all. My Iron Guards and my Mornfang couldn't give a crap about Mangler Squigs, but there are a vast diversity of units in their meta at the moment that Manglers do run over. And that just shows a change in modality. We used to see Manglers as like, oh my God, keep that away from my Death Star because it'll, cut it in half. And now they've been reduced, and probably rightly so, reduced to more of like, here's this big wrecking ball that I'll run through your light units and then get in your backfield and be an absolute nuisance. So I see Mangler Squigs as more going into the realm of X Factor units, things that are a little harder for new players to use. So I would probably, if I was a new player and I was playing Orcs and Goblins, I'd probably just have the Fanatics. I wouldn't take the Manglers because they can be a bit of a skill piece. Like if you use them badly, they're just dead. But definitely like the X Factor units, if with a little bit more confidence, definitely want to look at adding them in. But changing over to shooting. So we're playing MMU, which means shooting's probably we're not trying to look at shooting as a way to get points. We're trying to look at shooting as a way to enable us to maneuver across the table and contest the battlefield more readily than try and actually reduce your opponent's unit count, which usually means you want to take stuff that's going to clear chaff. So if you're not going to take chaff, you don't have the confidence in the movement phase to wheel chaff, or you don't have the ways to shut down Impetuous, or you know the Wyvern Boss. And this applies to any army out there. If you don't have an army that has really good points effective chaff, you want to look to see if you have points effective shooting, so that you can just win the chaff battle by killing all the opponent's chaff, and then it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. And then it's just down to who's got a better movement phase and lines up charges more effectively. So what kind of shooting would you advocate for? I personally would say if you have a decent shooting unit in your core slot, you definitely want to have a look at that, especially if you can't take good chaff. You want to spend core points on anti-chaff shooting. But then you can, extend that to a lot of artillery pieces. We used to, and the same thing to say about the Mangler Squig. We used to see organ guns and Hellfire, whatever the Empire organ gun is. And, 3 rock lobsters and stuff like that, actually just taking chunks out of your opponent's best units. Now, a lot of the time, they're better off hunting those medium and those light units. What would you look for to grade whether or not a shooting unit's worth taking?
So for me, is there any way that they can get rerolls or improvement to their ballistic skill in the list, or poisoned attacks so that they don't have to roll to wound? Like, you want something that's going to be efficient for its points. The other thing about the game is because of the changes to cover and terrain, like a lot of shooting feels really anemic at times. Yeah. So you also have to consider, like, you don't want to invest too many points into a unit. When we look at Orcs and Goblins, they actually do have some pretty solid shooting options. Night Goblins are 3 points a model, right? Like they're more than that, but like they are cheap as chips. They're 4 points. You can give them short bows for 1 point. And then short bows are quick shot, so they always get to fire, stand and shoot without a penalty. They have the spider banner now, which gives them poison attacks on something. Yep. So like having a unit of 20 night goblins with a poison banner, and taking 3 fanatics in that unit, that's still 200 points. Right? Like that is not an overly expensive unit, and it's not hard to maneuver. I have 20 guys. I probably run them 10 wide. They're going to shoot either 15 or 20 shots if I happen to be on a hill. I'm going to get a couple poisons off. And then I have fanatics. So like it's a really solid unit. Wolf chariots, they have 3 bows on them. People forget it all the time. Once again, this is all low ballistic skill stuff, but it's still, it's very cheap. Goblin bolt throwers are only 45 points. If you really wanted to, you could take 3 of those. And even though oftentimes they're going to do nothing, there's going to be, like, if they kill 1 Chaos Knight or 1 chosen Chaos Knight, let's say, they just got their points back.
Happy days. Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And then the Doom Diver is the most forgiving artillery piece in the game. Mm-hmm. So I would highly recommend you slap a couple of those in your list. It's very easy to manage. It with the flap rule, it lets you avoid like really bad artillery rolls. Like go for it. There's lots of options in Orcs and Goblins.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, mate, that might wrap us up for this chat. I think we've done a little bit of a brief overview of the kind of things you should want to try and balance into the list. But I do think it's an exciting time out there for the budding tournament go. I'd love to be going to my first tournaments these days. It would be absolutely sick. We've come such a long way since, I guess, the battle days, even though they were still pretty freaking good too. But yeah, I do think it's a very exciting time to get jump in and get involved in the event scene. Any last parting bits of advice you'd want to chuck out there for the newcomer?
don't sweat the small stuff, man. Just get out there and play games. If your list isn't like as great or cool or well defined as you feel like it should be, who cares? Put the models on the table. Playing a bad list, at least you're still playing the game, and you're going to learn, right?
Correct.
You're going to learn what works and what doesn't work, and pick something you love.
Yeah, I agree. I think the worst thing you can do is wait too long. I think if you have a list, you're better off just jumping in and learning via iteration than sitting on the sidelines and waiting for the perfect matchup, the perfect army, the perfect meta to come around. Just jump in, give it a go.
And sometimes you're just going to surprise people with your wacky list. It's not common, but especially at an RTT. I'm going to tell a story to end the show, if you don't mind. So I ran a lot of RTTs. I've said it at the beginning of the show for Warhammer Fantasy Battle Edition. Way back, and actually I want to say a couple years into the edition, we'd been running a lot of events. There was this girl that used to come to our events. She brought this beautifully painted Wood Elf army. She was awful. She loved to play the twins, and this was before the Wood Elf Codex made the twins really good on the dragon. So she just was like always last place. Like between her and this dwarf player, the Wooden Spoon was just these two names for our RTTs. And then one time I was like, guys, I don't care if your army's painted, just bring a list that you think is going to rock people's socks and go all out. So we had this RTT. She showed up with a Slaanesh demon army that I'd never seen, just filled with seekers and wild ass shit. And I looked at this list and I was like, this list is fast, but it looks like garbage. And she went 3-0. Beat like everybody because nobody knew what to do with this list. They were just like, what the heck is this? We ended up having a fourth round because her and another player were like tied. I think we had 20 people show up for this event. And they were tied across the board on battle points on everything. So they did a fourth round, just the two of them. That she lost by like something silly. Like it was like 45 points. But yeah, and when we talked about it afterwards, she was just like this isn't a painted army, but I know how to play it. And it was really wild to see because Seekers were so fast. You could just get them across the entire table. So she was often flanking and in people's rears on turn 2 or turn 3. I think you weren't expecting it. But yeah, like, so feel free to bring your wacky ass shit. Sometimes you're just going to beat people because they've never seen it before because they're expecting to run into a Chaos Dragon. And yeah, that's it.
Totally agree. All right, on that note, we're going to check out. Hopefully you'll join us over on part 2. I think we have a submitted army book of the Vampire Coasts. Yeah, and I think you and Danny are going to give it a little once-over, little review, deep dive into some of the fluff and story behind such a thing. Where do they come from? Why are people writing faction books for this? And then the mad lad in our Patreon who has deemed it to be his life's work. So there's a Vampire Coast one, and there's also the Slaaneshi Cults Drukari book that I know Danny has already reviewed for patrons in the Discord, but only slightly. I think we might go into both if we have the time. It is wild. He started off with the absolute troll that is making Stormcasts for Warhammer Fantasy, regular Stormcast book. And I thought he was going to stop there. I thought he was like, just taking the piss a little bit, wanted to make some fun of people, annoy some nerds. But then he's just like, I just like doing this. And he's gone on to actually write some pretty sick stuff.
Oh, man. Some people just love this. I had a friend wrote the Fishman book for 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and that was great. So, you mean Murlocs? None of them. Make them get out of here. It was an old joke back in 8th. The Fishman Codex. Anyway, the cow level does in fact exist. We will check out. And mate, thank you so much for joining us. Please join us over on part 2 over on Patreon. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to That Old World Charm with those charming chaps, Adam, Danny, and Peter the Falcon. Thanks ever so much. Cheerio.